And our second scripture for today comes from Luke 5, verse 15 and 16. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And Curtis is going to come up and introduce our speaker for today.
All right, so we're happy to have Don Clymer with us here, sharing this morning along with his wife, Esther Reichenbach, who is from Switzerland. Don is a retired college teacher of Spanish and culture. He taught at both Hesston College and Eastern Mennonite University. He has worked extensively at integrating his faith with his intercultural experiences, especially his first such experience, which was in Honduras, and he's written a memoir about that, which is very good. He has led numerous student groups to Guatemala and Mexico for study and to encourage them to engage in mission and service. He's the author of 4 books and numerous articles. Don and Esther have 2 children, Marisa and Matthias, and 5 grandchildren, Frida, Maya, Azra, Isla, and Sawyer. He has a blog that you can follow. It's listed in the bulletin if you're interested in that. And he also has a website with writings and books and things there. Don is also my first cousin. His mother and my mother were sisters. His mother's no longer living, mine is. And Don has 10 siblings. And so it's, make sure I got it right, Jim Jeanette, Donald Dolores, Roy Rosine, Sylvia Sharon, Laverne Leonard, and Miriam. And then we'd always say, poor Miriam, because she was not paired with anybody else with the same first letter. And so Don grew up in Pennsylvania. I grew up in Virginia, so we didn't see each other a lot, but I remember just being with his family. My memories are of lots of laughter and singing. Those are the 2 things I think of when being with my Clymer cousins. So welcome, Don. We're glad to have you here this morning.
Thank you, Curtis. I'm glad to be here with you at Stanton once again. But just to say one thing about Curtis, it's obvious that I was one of the older cousins and he was one of the younger ones. In fact, the youngest one in our family. Anyway, I also like this picture that you have been showing up here all the time because, as he said in his introduction, my wife Esther is a native of Switzerland. And that looks a lot like the Matterhorn. If it's not the Matterhorn, I don't know what the Matterhorn looks like. But anyway, I am very glad to be with you again. If my memory is correct, this is the 3rd time that I've come to speak to you. And the reason for that is because I've had a long friendship with Kevin, your pastor. And Kevin likes to tell the story. We both graduated from seminary in 2008. And Kevin likes to tell the story that we went in front of the what's called the Thomas Plaza there at EMU to take our picture with our gowns on, full regalia. And he looked across the group of graduates and he said, "Who is that old man standing over there? I've never seen him." That was me. And the reason he had never seen me was because I was taking a course or 2 or 3 a year for about 8 years until I finally got my degree. And I think he went straight through in the 3-year MDiv program. And during that time, all those students who were on that track had little cubby holes in the library where they did their study and met together, had coffee together, and I never was with them. So I guess that's why he didn't know me. Anyway, since then, we have become very close friends. And he invited me here once again today to speak to you. We've become good friends, had coffee together many times, and he's a real supporter of all of my writing. And that is always good to know that you have someone who enjoys reading what you write. I am religious, but not spiritual. That seems a little odd for me to say since I have written a whole book on spiritual practices. It might also seem very odd since you have probably heard the same phrase turned around. I'm spiritual, but not religious. I have heard this from many of my students over the 9 years of teaching a senior seminar at EMU on dealing with suffering and loss. With what they mean is, I believe in God, and they have no problem with the spiritual exercises that we taught in our class, but they want nothing to do with organized religion. In fact, Jesus seemed to have problems with organized religion as well. In Matthew 23, he alone pronounces 7 woes against the Jewish religious leaders of the time, calling them hypocrites. They put following the letter of the Jewish law above mercy and justice. Was Jesus spiritual but not religious? Indeed, my non-religious students say that people who attend churches are hypocrites. They are not authentic. They go to church, put on their plastic smiles and nice suits. I see you don't do that here at this church. And then they go out about their business unscrupulously and have abusive relationships and whatever else you can find. Now, I don't believe that that's true here at Stanton Mennonite. But it's a stereotype. It's a stereotype that probably has some truth in it. I got the provocative title for today's meditation, and these things are slipping away, so I'm going to put them back here. From a podcast that I listened to several years ago from an Episcopal priest. He stated, I am religious, not spiritual, my title. And then explained what he meant. At first, and probably like you were a little bit taken aback by this proclamation. But after he explained his position, I got to see his point. He claimed that the quest for spiritual enlightenment is a very individualistic endeavor, lessening the need for community and gathering together for worship. That was what the Psalm 100 was about that we read for our scripture this morning, worshiping together. This fits all too well into the individualistic culture of the United States as well as my non-religious students. Although he was not against spiritual practices, he wanted to make a point about the need for organized religion to properly maintain connections to other people, along with providing important rituals. Despite this trend toward individualism in our culture, human beings long to be loved and be connected. We seek community. To be deprived of community is to be less than human. This is true no matter where we go in the world. Recently, I attended a dinner that was held for updates on the work of David and Rebecca Stutzman, who are VMM missionaries in Mannheim, Germany. They operate a community center for after-school activities in their section of the town. They also use the center for worship services. David grew up in Germany, the son of missionary parents, some of you might know, Janet and Linford Stutzman. One day out of the blue, he ran into an old schoolmate from those years. He had long, straggly hair and dressed like a hippie. They met several times for coffee and conversation, and David's friend wanted to know more about religion, so David gave him the Bible. After several months of discussions, he asked to be baptized. Now he is bringing all his friends to talk to David. None of them come from a church background in post-Christian Germany or post-Christian Europe for the most part. They all are on a search for meaning and connections. Interestingly enough, they are somehow attracted to high church liturgical services. Perhaps they're more religious than spiritual. I wonder how many thousands of other people are currently searching for meaning and connections in post-Christian Europe. And because of my non-religious students that I tell you about, I wonder how far behind we are in the USA to becoming post-Christian. Well, I want to talk about my own connections with a special community. I attend a Sunday school class of about 30 adults at Lyndale Mennonite Church near Harrisonburg. Before every class, we share things that are going on in our lives and take time to pray. Many of us gather 10 minutes earlier to share these concerns with each other. We have experienced several deaths of members of our class in recent years, and the way the class gathered around them who were grieving was remarkable. They felt included in a community that loved and cared for them. Contrast this with an elderly woman who my wife took care of. She was a home care nurse aide for many years. She had completely cut herself off from her family, was a bitter widow with no church community. When she died, my wife attended her funeral. It was not held in a church, it was held in a funeral home in Harrisonburg, and only a few other people attended this event. She had no friends, no support group, no one to eulogize her. She died an isolated and lonely death. I repeat, if we decide that we want nothing to do with organized religion, we miss out on a place to find connections with other people. Lyndale Mennonite Church, where we attend, and we've been attended there for about 30 years, has gone through an incredible number of upheavals in leadership during the past 8 years, during the midst of which the COVID pandemic hit, which did a number on a lot of churches. We had to ask 2 pastors to resign, and 2 others resigned for personal reasons. One pastoral candidate missed the required percentage of the vote of the congregants to be put in as our lead pastor. So, we are currently on another search for a lead pastor, the 5th in 8 years. Amid all the turmoil, and when we finally could worship in person after COVID, the numbers of people attending was greatly reduced. You can be glad for the stability you have with Kevin Gasser as your pastor for a number of years. Despite all this turmoil, Lyndale has had a very strong children's program. Many young families with children remained after COVID, and despite all this turmoil, and new ones continue to arrive. Our summer Bible school attracts an average of 150 kids, many from the community. Lyndale has a child care program that attracts people to come to this kind of an event, even though they don't attend the church. There's programs at summer Bible school for all ages, and it begins with a fellowship meal. The energy in our facility during this week is palpable. I invite you to come next summer. Perhaps some of my students who claim that they are spiritual but not religious would look upon the turmoil in our congregation over the last number of years to prove that they don't need organized religion. On the other hand, I look upon what we've gone through as proof of how a community can provide stability and love for each other despite everything we've faced. Those of us who remain are firmly committed to our life together and will support each other no matter what. It should be clear to you by now that unlike my skeptical students and many others today, I fully support organized religion in spite of its inconsistencies. However, I also support the quest for a deeper relationship to God through spiritual practices like those I write about in our book, The Spacious Heart, Room for Spiritual Awakening, which has been published by Herald Press. Ronald Rolheiser, a Catholic priest who wrote a book on spirituality called The Holy Longing. I brought a copy of it along with me. This is one of my favorite books on spirituality, and I've read an awfully lot of them in research for this book. In his book, he outlines what he calls 4 non-negotiable pillars of a healthy spirituality. The first one is contemplative prayer or meditation. The second one is belonging to a community of faith. The third one is social justice. And the fourth one is a mellow heart. Interesting enough, these 4 pillars of spirituality are equally divided between individual and corporate endeavors. Rolheiser's idea was to develop wholeness in our spirituality, both as individuals and as groups of people. Most of us pray, but contemplative prayer is more than just a quick blessing over our meal or a "now I lay me down to sleep" nighttime prayer. It involves being in silence for a significant period of time. Jesus models this type of prayer, although we don't hear about it in many sermons. In the Luke passage for this morning's scripture, we read, Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. I found a blog post by Bill Galtier, who did a study on Jesus' withdrawals to pray. Here's a quote from his blog. Quote, "Continually, Jesus withdrew from people, daily life activities, and the demands of his ministry to be alone with the Father and pray. Jesus' solitude and silence is a major theme in the Gospels. His ongoing, intimate relationship with his Abba, Father, Daddy, was the source of his compassion, wisdom, and power that we see on every page of the Gospels." Galtier continues, "The priority of Jesus' solitude and silence is everywhere in the Gospels. It's how he began his ministry, 40 days in the desert. It's how he made important decisions. It's how he dealt with troubling emotions like grief. It's how he dealt with the constant demands of his ministry and cared for his soul. It's how he taught his disciples. It's how he prepared for the important ministry events, like his death on the cross. Jesus invites us to join him in his solitude so that we can know God as Daddy too and share his love with others." Were you aware of how deeply this withdrawing for prayer was for Jesus and his ministry? This withdrawing to pray and the contemplative prayer that Rolheiser is referring to is a non-negotiable pillar of healthy spirituality. There are many other spiritual practices that would fit in the contemplative category, examples of which we write about in our book. These are just a few. These are all individual endeavors. These are one pillar of spirituality that my students would accept because it has nothing to do with organized religion. The second pillar of healthy spirituality is belonging to a community of faith. And because you are here today attending, you have no trouble accepting this pillar of faith. And I outlined my own involvement in a community of faith. This is the pillar that my students would reject for being religious, a part of organized religion. The third pillar that Rolheiser writes about is social justice. Mennonites have always included social justice as something to strive for, even if there are many different ways to define it. The relief sale is one place where most of us gather to work for raising funds for Mennonite Central Committee, which works with the whole idea of social justice. For me, it is reaching out to the poor. Most of our church mission agencies, especially MCC, have a social aspect to our outreach ministries. Perhaps we would do better in working at changing unjust structures that exist in our culture and around the world, but that's a topic for another sermon. This pillar is collective. It is working for the betterment of a community and is most effectively done through another community. For me, this is the work of a religious group, a church group, but many other organizations without ties to a church work at social justice. Therefore, my spiritual but not religious students might get involved in one of those organizations that doesn't have anything to do with the church. Actually, I think quite a few of them work with the MCC projects, even though it is a church institution. But anyway, a mellow heart is the fourth and final pillar of Rolheiser's healthy spirituality. I felt that he hadn't explained that pillar as well as he had explained all of the other pillars, the other three that I mentioned. And so I thought, here's a place that is waiting for a book to be written. And this is how my idea for the book on spirituality began. I approached my sister Sharon, who not only is a good writer, but also had been on a similar inner journey as me. After a bit of arm twisting, she agreed. Herald Press did not like the word mellow in the title. He said the pillar was a mellow heart. They thought it was too much like the 60s and the hippie movement. So we set out looking for a new term, and they came up with the term, a spacious heart. Rolheiser's idea of how to develop a mellow heart, a spacious heart, an open heart, or a tender heart. Those are all words that we used in our book to describe the kind of heart that he's looking for in this fourth pillar. A mellow or spacious heart is one that is drawn by God rather than being driven by culture. Our book deals with unmellow issues in our culture like anger, fear, cynicism, overconsumption, being in control, and perfectionism, just to name a few. We propose spiritual practices to overcome these tendencies in our culture. I suppose that my spiritual but not religious students could agree with these practices so as long as they were not attached to a church or a community of faith. Because I had been inspired by Rolheiser's book, we wanted him to endorse the book. And I was in contact with his secretary, his personal secretary, many times, and he politely rejected. I guess he gets, requests from all kinds of people to endorse their work. But he said, I would like to read your book when it comes out. So Herald Press sent him a copy of the book. How many of you ever heard of Ronald Rolheiser before? He's not really well known in our circles. He's a Catholic writer, and I have read all of his books, and I've been very, very influenced by them, especially the one, The Holy Longing, which I showed you. Anyway, see, where was I? Well, they sent him a copy, and I thought, yeah, that's the last we'll hear about that. But he wrote us a letter. I was very surprised, and this is what he said, quote, "Thank you so much for writing this and developing the concept of a spacious heart. I much enjoyed the book." Apparently, one of his pillars, the one on social justice, received quite a bit of harsh feedback. People could agree on all the others, but social justice, that's not what we're supposed to be about. Anyway, he wrote to us and thanked us for including social justice instinctually in our book. And he says, "I know that Mennonites have always had this emphasis." Well, we both felt very affirmed by his affirmation of our book. He had to have read it, or he wouldn't have known that there was little tidbits about social justice throughout it. So by now you are asking, what happened to the idea that I am religious but not spiritual? Title of the sermon. Truth be told, I used the title just to get your attention. Did it? Did you wonder what on earth I was going to say when I proposed that, when you saw that title? Well, my intention for today's meditation was to show that a healthy spirituality is both religious and spiritual. It is both individual and community-based. It is contemplative prayer alone and prayer with a community of faith such as I described in my Sunday school class at Lindale. Not only did Jesus model how to withdraw and pray, but he also modeled how to pray in public with the Lord's Prayer. Did you notice that it's not an individualistic prayer? It's a communal prayer. It's not my Father in heaven, it's our Father in heaven. And it's not give me my daily bread, but rather give us our daily bread, and so forth. I also wanted to show that our spirituality involves reaching out to others through our mission and social justice efforts. To have a holistic spirituality, we need to pray contemplatively, to gather as a body, to reach out to others, and to not take ourselves too seriously. These are the 4 non-negotiable pillars of a healthy spirituality. Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, whom I've read and enjoy his writings very much, says, true wholeness brings the inner and the outer together, both the personal and the collective. And this is what I have attempted to do in today's meditation. May God bless you richly as you work toward a holistic relationship with God and your fellow pilgrims. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that message. I really appreciate the reminder of alone time. That sounds lovely. Now is the time to share